Universalist Society of Schenectady. She or they are pronouns that fit for me, and I serve as co-minister here alongside Reverend Wendy Bartell. Please use Wendy's name rather than pronouns. We so appreciate that you have made time in your day, in your week, to be able to attend here this evening. Whether you're here in the Great Hall or here on Zoom, shout out to the folks online. Nearly each week, this congregation recites a statement of covenant. We don't have a creed or a belief, but rather some agreements about how we want to be together as we grapple with life's challenges and deep questions of how to best live our lives. One line of that covenant is to care for the earth in stewardship, which is part of our call to care for the Hans Groot Kill and the Mohawk River and all of the waters around us. And we're so grateful for Dr. John Garver and his expertise, which we will hear more from tonight. And thank you to so many distinguished guests and invested folks who are here this evening. We want to particularly appreciate John McCabe, who's here from the Schoharie River Center, Alex, now I'm gonna get your last name incorrect, Likens? I got it, good, phew. Of SCIAC, the Schenectady County Environmental Advisory Committee. Portia Zwicker and Heather Epson are also here from SCIAC. Nicholas Klemchak of the Schenectady County Soil and Water Conservation. We have folks from a bunch of local neighborhoods. So a shout out to folks from Goose Hill, whoop whoop, folks from the Stockade Association, whoop, there we are, folks from the GE Realty Plot neighborhood, whoop. Big thanks to Paul LaFond, who is the Commissioner of Public Services, for being here and being able to share some info, and Marion Porterfield and Carmel Patrick from the City Council. Thank you so much for your presence. I believe that those were all the people that I were going to make sure I named. If we didn't name you specifically, thank you for being here.
And we've come together not because of who we are individually, but because of who we are collectively, right? We're here to take care of this place, this earth that we have been gifted. So this evening is intended to be a time of education, of deep listening to the harm that has been happening, what has already been done, what more can help mitigate the situation that we are in. We want, in this context and moving forward, to establish as well as strengthen relationships across our stakeholder groups, organizing our community, and I would say maybe even communities, to address the contamination of the Hans Groot Kill. And to remind ourselves that we need one another, that we are in this together. So let us remember that tonight as we listen for understanding and for being honest about where we might be falling short and where we can be doing better. And if, as the presentation is happening and you can't quite read the slides, feel free to move yourself to a position in which you can read, because we want you to be able to do that if sight is available to you. In Unitarian Universalism, we honor that each of us is a part of the interdependent web of all of existence. In this congregation, we have a Green Sanctuary team and a Social Justice Action team that have helped to steer us in a direction towards paying attention to the situation with the Hans Groot Kill. And in that interdependent web, we think of and care about the students at Union College, the residents of the GE Realty Plot and other neighbors nearby, especially those impacted by this, as well as some other waterways that are in a little bit of trouble. The members and friends here of UU Schenectady, because it passes right through our property or alongside the property. And we are just as worried and concerned about and appreciative of all of those working for justice in various and meaningful ways throughout our city and communities. And the ducks who have just returned. We have a couple of ducks who come back each spring, and we're a little bit worried about them, given the circumstances with the kill. We heard them today during staff meeting quacking. It was a lovely sound, even if we are also worried about them. And a red-tailed hawk that circled above us today. A bald eagle we actually saw there 2.5 weeks ago, hunting right here in Steinmetz Park. And we are all interdependent. We are connected with all life. The trees, the water, the air, the sky. The people who walk their dogs along the trails. And each of us gathered in this circle, including in our Zoom room, in the extension of our circle. So as we remind ourselves that we need one another to do what is right, with expediency to the best of our ability to protect our part of this precious earth that we share, let us now warmly welcome Dr. John Garver, Professor of Geology at Union College, to hear what we may learn this evening.
You were warned you're going to might need to get a little closer. Thank you so much for the warm welcome, and actually also the comments about a shared responsibility and stewardship for our natural resources, the Hans Groot kill, and the Mohawk. Actually, one of the things that's driven me in my life is to understand the Mohawk itself and those stressors on the Mohawk. And I think one of the things that strikes me as quite remarkable coming, sort of emerging out of the pandemic here, is how much we value the shared resources that we have in this community, including the Mohawk and green space, et cetera. And I guess what I'm here today to do is to tell you a little bit of sort of data-driven. So I'm a scientist, I'm a geologist, but I'm a scientist, and I've been working with my wife, Jacqueline Smith, on this problem with the contamination in the Hans Groot kill, including Tom and Mary Werner, for a long time now, thinking about where are the problems, and again, I want to get at it from a data point, and use those data to inform us about where we are in the Hans Groot kill and what potentially are the solutions. So some of the news, most of the news actually is not good. It's quite contaminated. And we have some pretty good idea about where that contamination is coming from. So do I just ask for the next slide? Yeah, okay. Can I have the next slide, please? I guess I need to use a microphone, don't I? Okay. So it probably, for one thing, I'm really appreciative to this audience that cares in a huge way. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here on such a nice day. But most of us don't think about on a daily basis what happens with the water circulation system in our community. So what I'd like to do here is sort of just real briefly sort of take us through this. But so we're here in Schenectady, and there's this water distribution system: Glenville, Scotia, Rotterdam, Schenectady. These are the municipal well fields, including Niskayuna. Niskayuna blends with Schenectady, but it's an entire system of water in and water out. So this is the municipal water system. This is the water you drink when you make dinner and the like. So next slide, please. When you flush, or when that water goes out, it goes into the sanitary sewer system, and that sanitary sewer system ends up taking that water to the Schenectady wastewater treatment plant or the Niskayuna wastewater treatment plant. If you're in parts of Scotia, that's going also to Schenectady, but much of Glenville, as we know, is on septic system and is not integrated into the sanitary sewer system. So these are two separate water in, water out in terms of the circulation system in the city. If we go to the next slide, what we see here is layered on top of that the third element, which is stormwater. And so stormwater, the stormwater conveyance system, which is here in the yellow or the orange lines, Follow topography and follow the sort of natural rhythm and contours of the city. And this is where the Hans Groot Kill comes in, because the Hans Groot Kill has been integrated into the city's stormwater system forever. I mean, from the very beginning of the city. Also, Cow Kill and Mill Creek, et cetera. We'll get to that. We'll get to that a little bit later. But nonetheless, these are three systems that should be operating independently from one another. Now that Schenectady is what's called a municipal separate stormwater sewer system, or an MS4. So we separate the wastewater from the stormwater, and that's new actually, and that some cities don't do that. They mix them, and there's some real problematic cities in that particular case. So I want to step back just a little teeny bit here for understanding where we are and where we've been. And these are two super important federal regulations. The Clean Water Act first passed in the early 1970s, and a couple of amendments to it, and then the Safe Drinking Water Act. These are the two most fundamental things that protect us and protect our surface waters. And it has been so important for protecting the integrity of not only our surface water, but also the water that you drink. So I want to spend just a half a second here on municipal drinking water. The municipal drinking water, when you take a drink of Schenectady water, you're pretty much guaranteed that that's good water, and it's certified, or it's not really the right word, but it's tested on a regular basis, and the oversight in the state of New York for that water is the Department of Health, largely. This Clean Water Act is really where we got it together in terms of protecting our surface waters in the United States. And the whole goal of the Clean Water Act in the early 1970s was fish, drink, swim. And the goal was to have all of our rivers, our surface waters, fishable, swimmable, and drinkable by the early 1980s, in a decade. We have not realized that goal. In fact, we fell short of that in a significant way. And we made significant improvement. Make no mistake about it. The water quality surface water quality is so much improved now that we have the Clean Water Act in place. But here's the key, here's the critical point here, is where these two intersect. Where these two intersect, surface water that's used for drinking, that includes the Mohawk River in a very direct way. So Colony and Cohoes drink the Mohawk. So what we put in the Mohawk matters in a very significant way, and that also then affects regulation and the way in which we are allowed to or not allowed to pollute our surface streams. So I want to just emphasize that this is largely overseen by the EPA, but in the state of New York, the Clean Water Act and the fish, drink, swim, et cetera, this is surface waters, this is the New York State DEC, who is primarily in charge of the regulations associated with those surface waters and ensuring that those surface waters are not contaminated and polluted. Next one, please. So in this simple diagram, again, I'm a professor, so I just have to teach you something. How interesting can sewage be? So this is the system. The combined sewer systems is the system that we want to stop. We want to get off this in the United States. And what this means is that during dry weather, we have sewage that ends up going off to the sewage treatment plant. But when it rains, the stormwater mixes with that the sanitary sewers, and the pipes can't handle it, so it overflows, and that's called a CSO, or combined sewer outlet or overflow. So you think, really? In this day and age, we actually let sewage go directly into the rivers, and we do. Actually, so Troy and Utica and downstate, there's a number of cities that still do this on a regular basis. And that's direct raw sewage going into the Hudson or the Mohawk or other tributaries. The transition is happening, and it's excellent. It couldn't be better news, because what we're doing is we're transitioning to the municipal separate stormwater sewer system. Again, that's a mouthful, which is why it's called the MS4. So in the MS4, when it rains, that rainwater goes off into the river, and it's clean, and the sanitary sewers continue to go to the sewage treatment plant. So they should be separate, and that's important because that ensures that we have high quality water. So Schenectady has been an MS4 community for over a decade at this point, separating stormwater from sanitary sewers. Next one, please. So we undertook, actually Jackie started this in 2018 and 2019. We started looking at water quality, and this is largely driven by colleagues that we have interact with at the Mohawk Watershed Symposium and Riverkeeper and a number of other places. But here's a picture of the Hans Groot kill with one of our Jackie's first student, Eva Willer-Bauer. And what we're looking at and sort of thinking through here is using fecal indicator bacteria to understand the contamination. And the fecal indicator bacteria, I need to give you a little bit of a lesson on bacteria and how they work and what we use for this. But it's a quite robust system, and once the lab starts going, we just generate sample after sample. And essentially what Eva's doing is reading a sample here, so if it glows, it's contaminated, it has bacteria in it. So she's going to mix that with a special food, incubate it for 24 hours, and then read bacteria concentrations. So bacteria concentrations really are our primary guide that we use to think through this. Next slide, please. So when you get into the microbial world of sewage, it's super complicated. It's frightening complicated. But let me just break it down for you. There are bacteria, viruses, and parasites. Okay, and in the bacteria, in the bacteria world, there's a couple that may be familiar to you. E. coli, for example, and Enterococci or Enterococcus, which we're going to be looking at in a minute. Viruses include enterovirus, norovirus, and of course coronavirus. And then parasites, and parasites are probably familiar, at least you probably heard of Cryptosporidium and Giardia lamblia, which is largely known as Giardia. But these two parasites are probably familiar to you because they're chlorine resistant. If they end up in municipal water or in swimming pools, the chlorine doesn't kill them, and the chlorine does kill almost all the other bacteria in this list: total coliform, fecal coliform, E. coli, streptococci, etc., except Enterococcus. Actually, it's chlorine resistant. And then that makes it incredibly useful for the kind of forensic work that we're going to be doing, or that we've been doing, because the Hans Groot kill is also incredibly salty from the road salt that we use. It's so salty, some measurements that I took this winter, it was 1/3 seawater. And so, take seawater and just dilute it by 1/3. You could actually taste, if you wanted to put your tongue on it, you could taste it, and that ends up, that high chloride concentration is very damaging to other bacteria. So when we're doing the testing, we're using Enterococcus because it's chlorine resistant. So next slide, please. So this is where it gets a little complicated about who's doing what and why. In New York State, the DEC uses total coliform, fecal coliform, and E. coli. A number of years ago, the EPA said to New York State, remember, EPA in terms of the Clean Water Act is in charge. The EPA said to the DEC, stop, and start using E. coli and Enterococcus. And the DEC just hasn't done that transformation yet, but a lot of us have. And again, this issue of the Enterococcus being salt tolerant is really important because it allows us to do the forensic work that we need to do. So there's a couple of, I'm not going to get too much into the detail here, but suffice it to say that when we take a measurement of Enterococcus in the surface water, there's a couple of different ways you can sort of look at that significance of that measurement. But if it has a value of 60, that's triggers, according to the EPA, what's called the beach action value, and that's sort of no contact. If it's above 60 NPN per 100 milliliters, so I'm just going to use 60. We don't need to worry about units. And also another way that this is phrased is coliform-forming units, or CFUs, per 100 milliliters. Okay, so it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter, but 60 is when they would warn you that you shouldn't have contact with the water. You okay?
1 second. Just getting off.
I can move back.
I don't think it's you. I think it's the microphone.
What are you going to do to it?
Turn it slightly away from that speaker.
Oh, okay. Okay, and so But if we do repeated measurements over and over and over, and the ideal way to do it is to do it for 5 weeks straight. So week 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we take all those measurements and we determine a geometric mean. It's sort of like a mean. It's a little bit different than a regular average. And we use that number. That number should be 30 NPN for a geometric mean. And that begins to get sort of at the regulatory levels, where it's okay, if the creek is failing, it's going to be above that. Now, I've augured into those two numbers, 60 and 30, and we're going to be so far above that, it really doesn't matter. Next slide, please. So if we look at so this is the work by my colleagues Neil Law and others at SUNY Cobleskill and Riverkeeper, but if we look at the numbers, and I know you can't see this at this point, but you can probably see the colors of the entire Mohawk. So here's Schenectady, and we have one of the higher values in the lower part. But if it's green, it's good, and if it's red, it's not good. There's some big problems up in the Utica area, Amsterdam area, Schenectady area, and then Albany actually has huge problems because they have CSO type issues. Next slide, please. But I want to, before I get into the specifics of the Hans Groot, I just want to remind us, and I'm going to circle back to this in a minute, but I want to remind us about our setting. So these are the geometric means that were measured by Riverkeeper and partners going down the river, and the highest value in the lower part of this part of the Mohawk is at the Mohawk Harbor in downtown Schenectady. And that's downstream from the Hans Groot. And the value here is 180, which is a failure. And that's a geometric mean that is taken repeatedly over one summer, about 10 sampling over one summer from 2015 to 2022. So this is actually a huge data set where Schenectady's failing, at least in the Mohawk, is failing in this particular part of the Schenectady pool. And if we go downstream, and I really want to emphasize this point about stewardship and about caring for our surface waters. Downstream is the water intake for Colony, and then downstream from that is the water intake for Cohoes, and that's about 100,000 people that drink the Mohawk. Now, I'm not saying that bacteria comes from here and goes into their water intake. They purify, they filter, they purify the water, etc. But I am going to tell you that the high nutrients and the ability of the water to have algal blooms and this kind of thing complicates the water treatment system in a huge way downstream. So this is part of being neighborly. It's also part of stewardship of our water resources in this area. Next slide, please. So we, and I know you're all sitting in the back at this point, but and this is data driven, but let me, so these are the same numbers in the Mohawk, 33, 180, 40, 43. So there's Mohawk Harbor that's failing. And we've had a number of students working on all of these small tributaries, and we have a lot of problems here in the Mayfair section of the Indian Kill. We have problems in Horstman Creek that goes into the Crum Kill, and the Hans Groot Cowhorn Mill is impaired, but the Hans Groot is by far has the worst water quality of any of these creeks that we have systematically sampled over the years. Now, I have to say there, with a caveat in that our ability to test and get water samples from the Mill Creek, Cowhorn Creek is impaired by the fact that it's buried almost everywhere. And it's very difficult to access those surface waters. But the number here for the Hans Groot, this is the 2023 geometric mean of 952, which of course is way above 60 or 30, the geometric means that we talked about before for the EPA criteria. Next slide, please. So this is just an example to remind me that, so this is time, this is from 2019. This is time going from April through October. This is rainfall rates, and then this is Enterococcus values. And the key point here is, here's the Mohawk. But this is log scale, and then here's the Hans Groot. And just to remind me that usually the Hans Groot kill is about 100 or more times higher in its bacteria content than the Mohawk River. Next slide, please. So what we can do here is we can look at the Hans Groot kill as a watershed or as a sewer shed. And so the interesting thing, the good thing about the Hans Groot is we can see it. It's daylights, which means it's not buried. And I think there are other communities that work on unburying their creeks and interacting with them, and Schenectady specifically buried the Cowhorn and Mill Creek because there was so much sewage. But with respect to the Hans Groot, we have actually a very good sort of way to longitudinally sample, so we can go from one end to the other and see how water quality varies. And if we the very first data set that was published in 2020 that Eva Willer-Bauer worked on, I know this is just completely small, it's in the next one, but 500, 800, 500, 400, 800, and 1,000 NPN per 100 milliliters. So this is quite impaired. Again, it's about well above the EPA criteria. Next slide, please. So this was the very first one that we published in 2019. And this pattern is systematically higher in the upper parts, and so this is the GE Realty plot. So we're right where are we? We're right here, I think, or no, here. No, I think we're right in between, actually. So here's the Realty plot, and it's fed by these stormwater systems, the Sherman, the Plaza, Rugby, et cetera, in what we call the headwaters, and the headwaters are up at West Alley, where the 3 pipes come in and converge, and very, very poor water quality when those all converge. Eva pointed out specifically this pipe, and she called it 5P, which is sewage, and it's coming directly in. The numbers are very high. The geometric mean, or the means that she produced here, 2,250, means that that's definitely an impaired pipe that needs to be taken care of. Next one, please. So I would emphasize, before I go on here, I emphasize that one of the reasons that we have what we have is things are old, and things are old and cracked, and there's been settlement, and there's been all sorts of problems with the infrastructure. This is a map showing, this is a tax map actually showing the age of, this is the, first of all, in the red is the sewer shed, and in the blue is the age of the homes. And so, of course, there's the old core of the city, and Union got up on its grounds in about 1820, but all the blue here is pre-World War II. And pipes just don't last. That's just all there is to it. There's going to be issues and problems associated with that pipes, and the city, of course, there's a sort of constant struggle to keep up with those pipes. Next one, please. So one question, so we have high values. We have high concentrations of fecal indicator bacteria. The creek is contaminated. When you look at the creek, you think, but does it look that bad? And so that's actually an important clue, because what it means is there is not open sewage going into the Hans Groot. It's sneakier than that, because what it is, we think, is leaky pipes where sewage is exfiltrating or seeping out of those pipes and going through the ground and eventually working into the creek, which means, and so I feel bad even saying this, but it means that there's not floatables. and floatables, if they're floatables, I'm telling you, this would have been fixed 10 years ago. We wouldn't even be here. So what it means is that the liquids are making it through, but the other stuff really isn't. So we know, so here's 5P. This is suspect number 1, but it's one of many. This is the headwaters, so on West Alley. So one pipe here, and one pipe here. Again, that's integrated into the stormwater system. We've tested, we just did a bunch of testing of these specific pipes in the last fall, and they all appear to be equally impaired. None of them are good in terms of water quality. Next one, please. So, this is the part of the job that gets a little bit weird, because as an academic with students, we go into pipes, so we sort of need to check these things out. This is a leak below Stratford Road Bridge, so Hans Groot is flowing away from us. That leak right there, you can see the splashing. That's, as far as we can tell, pure sewage going right through the bridge. This is on campus. This particular pipe looks particularly problematic. I mean, so does the whole water. Here's a campus problem. Look at this. This pipe is broken. right here, and the sanitary sewer line goes right through there, but that pipe is broken, and that is one of the suspects that we have. But there are many examples, we think, and this is something that we talked about for a number of years. There is no single easy fix for this problem. It is 1,000 cuts, and it's 1,000 cuts because we know that we have joints that are broken in the pipes, and we have all sorts of ancillary problems associated with that. So there are times where we know exactly what's going on. And so this is one of the ones that Tom Werner shared with me. This is Union College campus in December 25th. This is a huge rainstorm that we had, a big rainstorm that melted all the snow, et cetera. And this is the sanitary sewer. So this is right on campus, the sanitary sewer. These are floatables, at this point. And this went out of the sanitary, went into the stormwater, and then directly into the Hans Groot. This is unusual, actually. This is unusual. And this is a DEC reportable offense of overspilling of sewage into our surface waters. Next one, please. Here's another one, as it turns out. And this has been remediated. So here's the sanitary sewer. This overflowed in September and also in October of 2021. It's overflowing here. And we know, and this has been remediated, we know that there were roots that were growing in the sanitary sewer line through here. So it was all dug up and reamed out. And so the roots were taken care of. But I want to emphasize that when roots get into the sanitary sewers, there's a reason for that. And that reason is the roots can get into the sanitary sewer because there's cracks and breaks. And that's clogging and impairing the ability of that sanitary sewer to move sewage to the sewage treatment plant. And so, of course, this is covered on campus, et cetera. This is actually quite disruptive on campus. Next one, please. So we also know that when it rains a lot, there is a phenomenal amount of sewage. The highest values we get is when it rains, by far. So this is October 2019. This one here. So this is rainfall. This is Enterococcus on the y-axis, and then rainfall on this y-axis, and then date through October. This is the famous Halloween storm that was really big up in the upper part of the Mohawk watershed. And so this is rainfall. These spikes are rainfall. And then in red here is the pathogens. And so this first one, and this is incredibly difficult data to gather because we have to, with students, be going out and collect the samples and then take them into the lab, through the whole event. And, sometimes it doesn't work out. But nonetheless, what we're talking about here is values that go up to 25,000 NPM per 100 milliliters, which is, of course, just astronomical values of the sewage in the water. And there's a direct relationship, of course, with rainfall and then the sewage surge that happens. So this is literally a sewage surge that's going through. And it's probably not just the Hans Groot. We see this in other settings, in other urban settings, but certainly these values are very high. Next one, please. So this one, I actually showed this picture a minute ago. This is on campus here. And so actually normal sanitary sewer water isn't this brown as this. Actually, it's remarkable because 99% of it is water. But nonetheless, we tested this water in this picture, and we got 48,000, and this was in November of 2021. And so this is as the Hans Groot is going through campus. This is in the beginning of Jackson's Garden. Next one, please. So there's a way that we address this and we think about it, and that's what happens during wet weather. And in almost every other place where we look at sewage and weather-related sewage entering surface streams, there's almost always a really good relationship between cumulative rainfall, and usually it's 24 or 48, but this is a pretty quick system. So this is 12-hour cumulative rainfall, so it's 1.4 inches, 2 inches, and then Enterococcus values on a log scale, so 1,000, 10,000, and 100,000. So remember, I'm not even bothering at this point to plot 30 and 60, the EPA limits down at the bottom. It's just not worth it. And so we see this rainfall induced high values, but what's far more important is we see chronic impairment. This chronic impairment here means that it's always leaking. And that's the challenge. That's going to be the challenge to get this fixed up. This isn't the typical, it rains a lot and sewage enters the system. It is chronically leaking. And these values here, 100, 1,000, 10,000, these are dry weather values, which means that the pipes are simply leaking into the Hans Groot. Next one, please. So one of the things that we discovered in the data set from 2021 is that if we go through September and October of 2021 and we look at Enterococcus, it turns out we have this clustering of the data at low flow. And low flow is important because it's, you go out and you walk through and you look at the Hans Groot and it's trickling away. That's normal conditions. That's what we call low flow. And it's getting water from groundwater and pipes, as it turns out. But when it's really raging, that's a whole separate story, because then the whole municipal system gets involved. This is the high water, and this is the low water. This is the water. If you just walk along the creek tonight, you'd see something like this. And so we separate this out, and we have a low flow mean of 640. Remember, that should be down around 30, and then a high flow of 21,000. For 21,000, which means, of course, there's a sewer surge that's happening at the same time. But what's so striking, I think, and so important with these data is there's a gap. And we don't see a smear of points. What we see is low flow, and then we reach a threshold, and then we see a bunch of sewage. At least we think it's sewage. We see a bunch of fecal indicator bacteria. And that may mean that there's a remnant from the CSO where the dams are being bypassed. There's dams out there that are being bypassed, and that sewage is entering the system. That's the hypothesis. We can't prove that. We can't show that at all, but it certainly would be one viable hypothesis for these sorts of data. Next one. I'd like a couple other things I'd like to point out is some people have said to me, literally, it's just the Hans Groot. It doesn't really matter. And I still react to that kind of statement. It does matter, and we are stewards of this resource of our surface waters. But it impacts the Mohawk in a significant way. So even though it's small, it's almost like this injecting poison into the Mohawk. And I'm going to get to this why that's so important in a minute here. But this is some data from 2021. This is phosphate and this is nitrate. This is the Mohawk and a bunch of other sites that we were looking at. And here's the Hans Groot way out here. It's fertilizer. It's like taking bags and bags of fertilizer you bought at the Home Depot and just dumping it into the river. And you think, what could happen? It ends up causing biologic chaos down in the Mohawk. Next one, please. So here's an example. So this is the Enterococcus values that was taken by the riverkeeper on the Mohawk, right? So here, Lock 9, 35, 18. Lock 8 consistently has very good quality water. Gets into Schenectady, 488. This is just one day. This is October 25th, 2020. 93 and then down. So this is the Enterococcus that dies out as it goes down the river, but other pathogens don't. But there's this injection into the river. And what happens when we do that? So if we have extreme rain or rain that drives out into the Mohawk, watch what happens. Next slide. So here's the flow on the Hans Groot, and then this image up here shows us what's going on the Mohawk. If you could go to the next slide, I can zoom in on that a little teeny bit. But here's what happens. We're going to take the Hans Groot is going to put all this fertilizer into the Mohawk. And as it goes into the Mohawk, and I know you're not going to be able to see necessarily the nuance of this particular graph here, but the yellow graph is algal blooms. And we're fortunate here in Schenectady to have this RECOS monitoring system in the Mohawk. So there's a monitor at Lock 8 and there's a monitor at Rexford. It couldn't be better for understanding water quality. So we're right in the middle of it. And as the nutrients go into the river, In this particular case, the nutrients go in, and 2 days later, there's an algal bloom, and that algal bloom is shown here in the yellow, and the algae makes a huge spike in dissolved oxygen. So there's a big bloom of oxygen, and then the algae die, and there's an oxygen crash. And this crash down here, because bacteria are eating the algae, that crash there ends up impairing the water in a significant way for fish. So what's going on here is oxygen values of 4 to 6 milligrams per liter, but 4 to 6. So in the crash right here, that crash is below getting into the lethal limit for some sensitive fish. So, and I can't prove, and nobody can, prove that the Hans Groot is the nutrient driver that's driving algal blooms, but I can guarantee you that the New York State DEC is hyper concerned about algal blooms in the Mohawk, especially because downstream people are trying to drink that water, because some of these algal blooms can have toxins in them that are quite problematic. Next one, please. So we know that the city has done, the city started working on this, which is fantastic. We're so excited about this. And so the city did this microbial source tracking, and this microbial source tracking used a human DNA marker. And so this is actually one of the things you might sort of be concerned. Some people have said to us, well, maybe all the fecal stuff is from dogs and squirrels. It's not, and the city data show this, that the HF183, which is a genetic fingerprint of bacteroides, which is only in the human gut, are very, very high, over 1 million copies per 100 milliliters, which is basically at saturation, so that's quite high. In the upper part, and then lower through Jackson's Garden, and much lower in the Mohawk, again, I'm using a log scale. So next slide, please. So there's some more complicated ways that other agencies have sort of gotten involved with this problem, but fundamentally, the agency that's really responsible for overseeing it would be the New York State DEC. So the New York DEC started in on doing testing, and their testing has to be for 2 years. So they have to test for 5 weeks straight, 2 years in a row, and if it fails, then they will put it on a watch list that will then be remediated. So we just finished, so it was 2022, 2023, and the 2023 data just got released within the last month. This is the 2022 data, and this is not the greatest slide to see here, but although this is conductivity, just consider this to be rainfall or flow in the Hans Groot. This is when they took their samples, and here are the numbers. Oops, the slide moved here. Jackson's Garden, and this is now using fecal coliform bacteria. Remember, that's what the state does. But the important point is virtually every single sample failed in the sites that the New York State DEC looked at. They have released online now the recent data for Jackson's Garden. The geometric mean was 1963, and it should be, for the fecal coliform bacteria, it should be below 200. And so now we have the 2 years in a row where the New York State DC's testing has shown that it's impaired, and it's not quite clear to me actually what the New York State DEC is going to do next in terms of thinking through the problem with the city. Next one. So the final thing, one of the final sort of observations I'd like to make is some data that we just collected from in last fall, and this is a subset of our sampling from before on Union here, 5P, and then up at the headwaters. Next one. And to make a long story short, one of the things that the city does is it adds fluoride to the water. And that's for dental health, and that's actually a really good thing. But one of the remarkable things about the fluoridation of the Schenectady water is it's an incredibly useful tracer, because it's about 10 times higher than the natural background of fluoride. So if you look at normal, if you brush your teeth tonight before you go to bed, that has about 7.7 milligrams per liter of fluoride, I can guarantee it. And the natural background is so much less that what we can do is we can determine mixing of the two. And to make this is a little bit of a complicated story, but essentially at low flow, so this is cumulative rainfall, rainfall, and then this is a fluoride fraction. We calculate that if you were to walk out today to look at the Hans Groot kill, about 30% of the water is municipal water. And that's powerful. That's a totally separate way of looking at the problem. And what I mean by municipal water, remember, we go back to the beginning, we have drinking water and we have sanitary water that's been used. Both of those have that fluoride signal. There's no appreciable difference in the fluoride concentration, even though you all brush your teeth. And what that means is that we can't tell if it's sewage or if it's drinking water or both. But we know with the high pathogen levels, it's almost certainly some fraction of it is of sewage. I suspect, based on some data that my student collected, I don't have it here today, but I suspect actually that there is some drinking water problems, drinking water leaks in the lower part of the Hans Groot based on salinity measurements that we've taken. Next one. So I'll conclude here with a couple of comments about health. And is there a health risk of this sewage contamination? And this is an extreme case here. This is a sewage overflow on campus, and yes, of course, you don't want people walking around in this. But the more complicated question is there any sort of commingling underground? Commingling with our drinking water that may be a real big problem. So I offer this picture to get started on this discussion. This is a water main break in Schenectady, just around the corner here, actually, in February 2022. And this is dramatic. This is a Peter Barber picture. And water main breaks are really, really problematic for the city. They're expensive, they're inconvenient, they're problematic for a whole host of reasons. But remember, we have the two systems. We have our drinking water system and we have our sanitary sewer system. And if drinking water pipes are breaking, then we need to be worried that there's not going to be any commingling. So this is our drinking water. Next one, please. And here, this is a picture I took in October 2021. This is enterococcus values of this was maxed out at 96,000, not 30, 96,000. Look at this picture. School buses driving through this sewage. And I'm sorry, but I mean, this just was almost about as much as I could take in this. This is just not right that we have this sort of situation, the school bus plowing through sewage water. This is the one that has been remediated, but it's still, this is a problem that we need to address in a very direct way. So a couple of more comments here, and this is where it gets complicated. There's no question, this is where it gets complicated. Here's October 7th, 2021, Union's Delphic waters polluted by sewer overflow. This is in the Concordiensis. Here's 2 weeks later, gastrointestinal illness floods Union student body. In 2020, we had 30 confirmed cases of giardiensis on campus, and over 10 cases in the United States as a CDC reportable outbreak. So we had an outbreak. 4 of them were confirmed, 30 were assumed to be giardiensis. We had another outbreak in 2021 that was over 70 students, faculty, staff, and also that extended off campus. And the etiology of that is not known. We don't know what drove that particular gastrointestinal illness. And trust me, I looked into it. I called the health department, and I tried to figure it out. And without the direct samples, actually, it's really hard to tell. So I would say that there are some warning signs, and some warning signs that we need to be aware of. And when we end up having problems of drinking water, mains breaking, and the like, we need to be on the lookout for understanding the epidemiology if we do end up having an enteric disease that is associated with it. Next one, please. Final point. It's raining a lot. The increase in rainfall in this part of New York State is significant, and it's increasing at about 1 inch per decade at this point. But the increase now is most significant in the summer. So what this plot shows is January, February through December. This is an analysis we did a couple of years ago, but the steepest curves and the steepest increase since 1945 is June, July, August, September, October. That's when we're getting these big surges, these big rainfall events, and you all know what they look like, because sometimes you have to drive through them, you have to deal with them. It's 2, 3, 4 inches of rain in half a day or a day under saturated conditions. And one of the things that's happening is our pipes just simply can't handle it. So we have two problems. We have two problems going on here. Next one, please. Yeah, so this is a little bit of a sort of an academic sort of aspect of the problem. We know, based on simply taking measurements of extreme precipitation and precipitation, that since about 2000 or 1990, the amount of, this basically is extreme precipitation here, and it's largely driven by increase in sea surface temperatures in the North Atlantic. So it's Atlantic water, and it's really a sort of southern New York focused problem, but we're getting part of it. We're getting part of the increase in the rainfall. So I put this okay. So this is the academic in me, right? And so Journal of Water Health, association between extreme precipitation, drinking water, protozoa, and acute gastrointestinal illness in North American Great Lakes cities. Extreme precipitation, emergency room visits of gastrointestinal illnesses without combined sewer systems, analysis, Massachusetts data. We need to be looking out for this kind of thing. And I don't know, and I don't think that we are. But it's something that we need to be thinking about with respect to our systems. Make no mistake about it. Make absolutely no mistake about it. I am not criticizing Schenectady's drinking water. We have some of the best water in upstate New York. The aquifer that we drink from, the Great Flats Aquifer, is absolutely outstanding. But we need to be careful. And on campus, we've seen these two outbreaks. And the reason that we've seen these two outbreaks, especially in 2020, is that we had every single person on campus, faculty, students, staff, reporting daily health statistics because of COVID. A unique experiment. And that's why we knew about it. Next one, please. So I would posit here that we're at a funny crossroads. That this is time, and this is this sort of volume, and this is the capacity of our stormwater and sewage pipes that over time is actually decreasing because age and impairment. And the precipitation runoff is actually going up. We know this. We can measure. This is straightforward. And I have a feeling that we're sitting in a place somewhere in here where we actually need to make some hard decisions. And I think one of the things that I conclude with is that we need, in Schenectady, we need to build resiliency for the future. I mean, most people who look at this problem agree. And if we build resiliency into our system, we don't need necessarily new pipes. We need bigger pipes. And those bigger pipes are the ones that are going to be able to launch us into the future. So I'll conclude with a statement by William Ruckelshaus, who was one of the very first and also the fifth, as it turns out, EPA administrator. So he was a Nixon appointee. And he said in 2023, so this is after he was out of the EPA, we're all part of the problem, and we all must be part of the solution. It is to this challenge that this nation must rise. Next one, please. So as you might have gathered this evening, I spend a lot of time thinking about this and other problems, especially in the Mohawk. I write a newsletter. It's free. It's on Substack. If you want to read it, I have all sorts of posts here. It's at mohawk.substack.com. And this is the primary way that I'm sort of getting this information out. So if you'd be interested in that, please sign up for it. I think the last slide here is the beginning. So I'd be happy to take questions if anybody has any. Yeah.
Catch your breath for a second.
Okay.
There are index cards if you have questions. We're hoping for about a 7:15 ending time. And we also have John McKeeby here from the Schoharie River Center. John, were you planning on, where are you? Thank you. Were you planning on making any remarks tonight, or you want to let the presentation sit and the questions commence?
I would just like to do John's and I have
Questions, excellent. Lisa, where can people get more index cards for their questions? Excellent. Folks who are on Zoom, if you have questions, you can send them in the chat. You should be able to send those directly to me as a co-host, Reverend Wendy, in the chat, and I will grab those as well. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Paul LaFond is also here from the city to be able to give an update
Yes.
on
Yes?
on what has been done.
I'm not going to come close after all that.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, would you like to or no?
No, I just want to tell you that, as Dr. Garber said, that the city has been looking into this for almost a year now with a consultant, which is MJ Engineering. And we had started in the area of, of the wall. We worked our way out. There's 5 sections we did. We did about 10,300 feet of pipe inspection. We have come across. Sure. What I do want to say is I appreciate, what you've said. We do know there is a serious problem in the Hunts Group building with bacteria. The city has started pipe inspections. We did approximately 10,300 feet over the last year. Through that, we have come across pipes that were interconnected or leaching into the storm sewer. We made 3 repairs when we came across those. And I agree, our infrastructure is getting old. A lot of the pipe is clay pipe. It cracks. You do get roots in there. What we see at the wastewater plant when we have a heavy storm is, in a perfect system, your flow should stay the same. In the sanitary, it's going to grow in the storm sewer because when the storm comes, that's going to take your stormwater to the river. What we see also is during a storm, our average flow at the wastewater treatment plant is 12.5 million gallons a day, but a storm comes in, we can peak at 40 million gallons. So there's infiltration, there's inflow and infiltration, both sides of the pipe. We have come across some laterals that we feel are cross-connected from homes in the area that are going out to directly to the storm sewer from the house. We started a pamphlet program. We've notified the homeowners of those houses. We'd like to get in and do some dye testing. There was only a few, about 17 in the 5 sections we did. We've gotten into some. There were, I think, 7 negatives, 2 positives, and we're still waiting to get in some other homes to get permission to do a dye test. The only way to determine if there's a cross connection, at least a direct connection from a house to the storm, is through a dye test. And it takes us about 15 minutes. Go in the house, we put some dye, in a fixture, toilet. Our camera's already in the line, and we just see if that dye comes out through the lateral. And then we can note it, and we'll work with the homeowner after that. After we get through these 6 more properties to gain entrance to, then we're going to start working out again. And we're doing this in-house, and like John said, it's something that's going to be worked on continuously, year after year. And because the structures are so old, there may be things in that system that were put in that where you do see sewage, when it does come over at a certain point, that dam spills now into a storm line, and we're not combined no more. The city did have a combined sewer overflow, which was at the Elko. That is closed now. So if that was to open, it would be a direct violation because now it's considered a sanitary sewer overflow. So that has been closed. It's not opened. We've done the upgrades to the pump station, to the wastewater treatment plant, and a new force main to help relieve the pressure in that area. But we're going to continue to look at this, and as time goes on, branch out further and further. And where we can record, where we can start to do lining replacement on pipes that do show lots of cracks, because like you said, John, the cracks are there. We can't take up every pipe, but we can do some lining. And we do budget some money every year to do some lining, and one of them is going to be the pipe by Union College, the one that we took the roots out to try and get that lined. So, thank you.
Good. Thank you, Paul. I guess there's a number of us actually in the room that want to thank you actually for the work that you've done with the city, and we know that this is a big lift, and we appreciate the work that you guys are doing for sure. Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Anyone else? Did you have a question? Oh, I see. It's all going to cards. Okay. Well,
They're all going into one place here, so that there may be variations on the same question, so we just wanted to collect it all just for a second.
okay.
There are some really good questions in here. Give me 1 second. What role, if any, does green infrastructure play in addressing stormwater and the increase of precipitation?
Yeah, good question. So do we need permeable parking lots? Do we need stormwater swales and this sort of thing? I think in general, in our society, yeah, we do. But specifically, this problem is bigger than that, frankly. It's just a lot of water. It's a lot of water. And just like Paul was saying, it's the detective work on those pipes that are really going to make the big difference. One of the things that we're not really dealing with in a direct way is surface street debris. So my wife did that with the work that she did with microplastics. So the Hans Groot has a significant quantity of microplastics in it. One of the highest actually she saw in the entire Mohawk. But that's a sort of a separate problem. The street debris in general is relatively clean compared to the sanitary sewers.
What do you think it might take to get amounts back to the 30/60 you spoke of?
A lot of work and a lot of money. I think it's going to take a huge amount of money. And I think one of the things that's happening now with the Bond Act and the state of New York, I think that there are a lot of opportunities now for communities to embrace that funding and take those things on. This is going to take pipe replacement. It's going to take slip lining, like Paul was just saying, which is where you put an inner sleeve on the pipes, and it's going to take a lot of detective work to figure out where the problems are. But it's all going to boil down to money, and I think that the city would be able to, given these incredible data that I've showed you today, move forward with grant applications to directly address the problem. And I think the city, so Glenville has been applying. Glenville has a sort of a separate problem because they're largely septic, but there's a huge amount of money available right now for addressing these infrastructure problems in cities in the state of New York.
How are environmentally sensitive species, like frogs and macroinvertebrates, faring in the kill? Has there been any specific research done on that level?
Yes, there has, and unfortunately the news is not good. This stream is so impaired that it has an incredibly limited ecosystem, is one way to put it. The New York State DEC did a biologic assessment that was, I think maybe in the year 2000, I can't remember what year 2000, it was a while ago, 20 years ago, and it came in at the lowest level. And so, and John McKeeby might be able to make some comments here about the biology, but I can tell you one thing from my heart and from sort of the data that we have. This is not a creek that children should be playing in. And so if you're, when I grew up and we're looking for crayfish and that kind of stuff, I can tell you one thing. First, you're not going to find any. It's just not a healthy ecosystem, and two, you shouldn't be in the water. There's no contact with this water. So yes, it's quite impaired in terms of the biologic community in it.
Do you have either knowledge or theories, data, that you've answered a little bit, but bacteria levels dropping from 180 in Schenectady to 40 in Niskayuna, that space-time continuum, if you will. You want to comment on that?
Yeah, so one of the things that's really important to bear in mind when we show these data is that all those measurements is Enterococcus, which is a type of bacteria, and once it gets out into the environment, it actually has its own sort of problems. It doesn't like sunlight, and it has all sorts of other ways in which the Enterococcus dies. But just because Enterococcus dies doesn't mean that all the other viruses, bacteria, and parasites die also. And so that's really important to be keeping in mind, is that if you're poisoning the water, or if contaminants are getting, pathogens are getting into the water, just because we use one as an indicator doesn't necessarily mean that the other ones are. And I would go back to the history of Schenectady in 1891, where RPI Professor Mason ended up doing epidemiology of the typhoid epidemic and determined that, in fact, typhoid was being transferred from Schenectady downriver to Lansingburg at the time, and then Albany, and this was a series of months that the typhoid was being transferred down the river. So we're all connected, and it's not just the single bacteria that we measure. It's a good question, though. It's a great question, because you can look at those and sometimes say, oh, it's better by the time it gets to Niskayuna.
This is a question from someone watching on Zoom. One slide mentioned that 30% of the Hans Groot water is from municipal sources, parentheses, fluoride, ... What is stream flow relative to municipal water flow into the largely residential Hans Groot watershed? In other words, if all homes dumped all their residential water use into the creek, what would flow be?
Oh, that's an interesting idea. I have no idea. I've never done those calculations. But you would be able to go rafting down it, probably. I just simply don't know the answer. It's a great question. But what you don't want, so the one pipe where we had the highest municipal water was around 60%. But that was a very, very low flow in that pipe. But I simply don't know the answer to that question. The city of Schenectady is handling virtually all the sewage, so don't worry about that. It's just this small little bit that's causing the contamination.
This may be a question for Paul from the city, but I'll ask it of you, and then Paul, if you want to jump in. Recently, there's been some construction on several roads replacing gas pipes, et cetera. Will there be replacing water pipes sometime soon as well?
There are no planned water pipe replacements. Other than when we are looking at an area.
Let me bring this to you. This room has a very interesting sound dynamic with dome.
Since the utility work that's being done by National Grid is very extensive, we won't be doing water lines on every street. We do have some projects on Craig Street where we are looking at where there's going to be a lot of construction there, road going in, sub-base, to redo sewer lines and water lines there to put that as part of the project. But just going through every street, every time there's a cut, National Grid's made a lot of cuts in the city streets to update all their gas mains and their services, but there's no way we could go behind them and do every water line, every sewer line. It just isn't, it's not feasible financially.
A separate project.
Yeah.
This person remembers reading a Union College student study on the high levels of microplastics in the HDK, Hans Groot Kill, after storms. Is this still a concern? Where's the plastic coming from, do you think? And how might this be remedied?
That needs to go to my wife. Jackie, would you like to make a comment? So this is Dr. Jacqueline Smith is at Union College, who was the lead on the microplastics work, not only here in the Hans Groot, but also in the Mohawk.
Yeah, wow. Teacher voice. I'll point out that the majority of the microplastics are actually fibers, like fibers from plastic clothes. They make up the vast majority. And John's right that the amount of the concentration of microplastics in the Hans Groot kills soars at high flow, but it's also very high at low flow, which I think gets back to the sewage. It's like the canary in the coal mine for sewage, you know, when you see those microplastics. What was the actual question?
Is this still a concern? Where's the plastic coming from? Which you answered, how can this be remedied?
At this point, we know microplastics are everywhere, including in all of us. So if I knew how to remedy that, we'd all be better off. I imagine it's still a concern. I haven't done any further testing since pre-COVID. I can't imagine that it suddenly disappeared because the majority of the microplastics were plastic fibers. And that's true in almost all the samples I collected. I did the Mohawk River and the bunch of the tributaries. Some of them had higher particulate. You know, Utica was pretty notable in that respect, but the majority, it's microfibers, plastic microfibers, and they are tiny. And that's just the ones that I could actually see under a microscope. That doesn't count the nanofibers. Those are the ones that are inside us all.
You named in passing some of the other local creeks and waterways. This person is wondering if you might make more comments on the Cowhorn Creek water quality.
So the Cowhorn is largely buried, is in tunnels. And so I had a student who did a thesis a couple of years ago, and she was looking at the outlet, which is in the, shoot, I knew this was going to happen. Thank you, the Binnakill, in the Binnakill. And the water quality in the Binnakill and those pipes that empty in there actually wasn't nearly as bad. So that's actually good news. But the longitudinal studies down the creek, and also Mill Creek, which actually goes underneath 890. 890 is completely buried. I would love to get under there someday. But that we have no idea. We just don't have any idea. And I guess one of the things I'd emphasize here is that when the state does testing and when Riverkeeper does testing, it's kind of patchy. And what I've been showing you and what you've been enjoying here in terms of data is a really concentrated testing that we do. So we've tested the Hans Groot over 320 times now, and all these other tributaries. And it's when you really get in and do that weekly testing that you get the rhythm of the creeks and the rhythm. But it's one thesis at a time that really we get these things done. But I can't say anything more about the Cowhorn. John, have you done testing there?
We've done some testing on the Cowhorn
Some testing on the Cowhorn.
over the years, because we've been doing this for a long time. And one of the questions I've been looking at and interested in looking at is what is the source of the Cowhorn? And is the lake up in Central Park, is that connected to the water in the Cowhorn also? I think it is, but I don't know because it goes underground, and I'm not sure where it goes after that. But it seems like if you look at the maps, it's in a straight line pretty much.
Yeah.
And
We've been looking at both the water quality up at Central Park and then looking at it as it's down in Vale, trying to see, if there's a change. And it does go through a lot of different neighborhoods underground, so that might be a source. I was also wondering, I was interested in the fibers, that if plastic fibers from clothing are so abundant, what is the source of those? And is that a way to look? I mean, if when you wash clothes, when laundromats wash clothes and there's a lot of fiber in them, is that maybe an indicator that could be useful to be able to look at? Is that a source as to where maybe there is some of those breaks in those lines?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just a thought.
So let me try to button this part up here. So I would say that it is in the best interest of the city to engage in systematic testing of Vale Park and all the water bodies that are used in a recreational way within the city, because there actually are a health hazard. And I think the data that you shared with me before from Vale is the water in Vale is quite impaired, number one. Number two, the microfibers, and that what Jackie mentioned with the microfibers from clothing, I think a really important opportunity, which we haven't been able to take advantage of, is that when you wash clothes with, Tide Pods or whatever, those have optical brighteners in them, and those optical brighteners are really easy to see in the water. And I've sort of wanted to do this, and Tom Werner, my colleague here in chemistry department, that was one of his things that he did when he was a union. And I don't know about optical brighteners, but I think there's an opportunity there to actually sort out how much detergent and how much laundry water is getting into the Hans Groot, but that's a different technique and a different approach. But it's doable. It's definitely doable.
And if you want to stop screen sharing the PowerPoint slide, just to get these last few comments that'll be bigger on Zoom, you could stop that screen share if you know how, and if not, don't worry about it. Penultimate question, which might be on more people's minds, is it okay that we share the recording of this evening and/or with your PowerPoint slides embedded, share with the folks who are in attendance?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that one of the things.
So if you want to receive it and don't already have contact with John directly, then please make sure you get your name and email on that list. We are not going to spam you and all that thing. We just want to share the video with you if you would like it after we have to process it a little bit so that it's actually shareable.
Yeah, let me make a comment about this, because the work that we've done, that Jackie started on the Hans Groot, is work that's been entirely funded internally by funds at Union College. And as scientists, we really care about just collecting data and interpreting the data. We don't really have, we don't have an agenda. We're just looking at the numbers, and I think one of the things that is most important about science in a case like this is that it's open, and that everyone and that's why we publish papers every year. We publish papers at the Mohawk Watershed Symposium that has the data, and they're digestible, so they're not too sciencey. So we try to make sure that we get the stuff out on a regular basis, and that means quick science, and that's I can't emphasize this enough. It's not only open science, it's actually quick science. We're trying to get this studies done and published within 1 year. And that's really, really hard to do in this modern sort of way that we do science, but we set out in the beginning to do just that.
And our last question for the evening, given all that we have just heard, and for some of us for the first time, for some of us not the first time, but we've had growing concerns ongoing, what ought we, in our various capacities, portfolios, responsibilities as human beings here, what ought to be our next step or steps?
That's a great question to end on. What are our next steps? What do we do? What do you do? And I think the first thing you do when you go home is write an email to Paul. And say, Paul, I saw this great talk today, and I think that the city needs to continue doing what the city's doing. This is going to take a lot of work. This is going to take a lot of work. And this is a bigger problem than just the Hans Groot. This is our relationship with our watersheds. This is the Mohawk. And I think, I've lived here for 35 years now, and I think in the past, few years, 5, 6 years, this is incredible new resurgence of interest in our water and embracing the river. Schenectady's got the harbor, and sort of we're dealing with this thing down in the stockade with the flooding and that kind of thing. But Schenectady's embracing the river, and it's just exciting and remarkable. But it's a shared responsibility, and it's a responsibility that if you think that it's unacceptable that sewage is going into our water bodies, then you need to say something. Because I'm done. I am done. Actually, I feel like at this point, there's not many more things except maybe optical brighteners that I really can take on in the Hans Groot. It's sort of the data's out there, and I think it's you as citizens need to sort of say, okay, we're ready to roll up our sleeves and write a letter. And I often say that. I mean, write a letter. Write a letter to the New York State DEC, the Commissioner of Water, and say it's just unacceptable. Help the city. Help the city, let's help ourselves in this. But I often say, write a letter. I write letters all the time. I mean, all the time. And I think your voice as a citizen will matter in a really, really significant way. So write the city council, write the mayor, and write Paul and say, we want to work with you, and we want to help you to make this a better place.
Thank you, Dr. John Garver. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for all of our guests, other people who have offered your answers and perspectives as well. Thank you so much. And thank your students, too.
Yeah, they're
Thank
the
you.
ones who did the work.
Thank you, thank you.